Welcome everyone to session 5 of our 5-part resilience series. Session 5 is Earth, Wind, Water, and Fire, Critical Lifeline Infrastructure, and it will be followed by a panel discussion of all of our presenters. So a quick reminder to keep yourself muted during Yume's presentation, and please hold your questions till the end. There is CE available for this session. Make sure your full name is on the screen so we know that you attended. And thank you everyone for coming. Let me introduce our final speaker, Yume Wang. Yume serves as affiliate faculty and senior advisor on infrastructure resilience and risk in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Portland State University. Wang's primary research relates to the transformation of communities from vulnerability to resilience in the face of disaster, including Cascadia earthquakes and tsunamis. She received the 2018 ASCE Laval Lund Award for practicing Lifeline risk reduction, the 2022 Engineer of the Year from the Professional Engineers of Oregon, and the 2022 Public Service Award from the Geological Society of America. Thank you very much, Yume, for coming. Well, I pass it to you.
You're muted.
Hello, everybody. Sorry about that false start. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, AIA, for organizing this and inviting all of us. I'm, just the 5th panelist here, and I'll be talking about critical lifeline infrastructure and looking forward to the panel session after my talk with Jay Wilson as the moderator. So let's see. So I wanted to ask if we are prepared for, okay, actually my slides aren't working quite right. Okay, my slides aren't working quite right, but why don't you please just stick with me. So I wanted to ask you the question, are we prepared for earth, wind, fire, and water? And I know that Jay Raskin first talked about earth with Cascadia earthquakes and tsunamis in the first lecture, and Ellen Scott talked about wind and water. Kurt talked about wildfires, and Kent, you talked about how do we make sure we can be up and recovered quickly after any disaster. So I don't know where you think we are, if we're ready for all of them or not, but I'd like to share with you some of the national hazard maps on this. So this is one for earthquakes. You can see that the Pacific Northwest has high seismic hazards, not quite as high as California, but really our risk is pretty severe in that it took us a long time to upgrade our building code to even accommodate for seismic shaking. Also on Earth, we have landslides. It's not surprising that we have plenty of landslides when we have the Cascade Range and the Coast Range, Klamath and Blue Mountains, lots of water. But in general, landslides are more localized event versus, say, earthquakes that can shake really a very, very large, big area. And in cases of earthquakes, you can also have a lot of earthquake-triggered landslides. For wind, this is the national wind map. You can see that instead of all the hazards being on the West Coast, the strongest wind hazards are in the Southeast. Not surprising. Hurricane Helene is, just hammering that area. So although we do have wind, our wind hazards are not that bad compared to other places in the nation. For wildfire, not surprising, we've been hit by wildfires quite a bit lately in 2020. I don't know if you remember the Labor Day fires. They were terrible. We also had the heat dome the following year. On the right, you can see, lower right, you can see the Maui even got hit. And Maui is, you know, in the tropics. You just don't expect it to have wildfires in the way that we saw them. So wildfire hazard is going up, as Kurt uh, uh, talked about. And water. Lots of different kinds of flooding. It's really broken down into 3 types of hazards: coastal surge, fluvial flooding from rivers, and also pluvial flooding, like in town. And we aren't dealing with just our current conditions. We also know how to consider future conditions. So what you see here is a map of Charleston in the 100-year flood on the left, and then in 2060 with sea level rise on the right. And you can see that some of this area here has filled in with hazards, with flooding hazards. And then, of course, there's tsunami flooding, and I'll talk about that in more detail a little bit later. So we've had our share of disasters, including, winter storms for decades. But, some of these disasters are getting worse. So, so it's something that we need to be doing something about. So in this image, you can see the Earth-related hazards in the middle of the Earth. That's little symbols signifying earthquake, tsunami, and volcano. And then all year round, whether it's the fall or winter, spring or summer, there's various hazards that we're exposed to, whether it's a heat dome or landslides or flooding. So I think a better question for us to be asking is, how should we better prepare future generations for earth, wind, fire, and water events? So my talk, I have 2 parts to it. First, the importance of lifeline infrastructure. And the second part, I'm going to talk about what I think are the 2 top danger zones in Oregon, and it's related to Cascadia earthquakes. One is the coastal area that will be hit by the tsunami, and the other is the critical energy infrastructure hub in Portland. So I first became interested in lifeline infrastructure in '89. I went through the Loma Prieta or World Series earthquake, and it left a very big impression on me. I had recently finished with my master's in geotechnical engineering from UC Berkeley and was consulting in the private sector and had been evaluating liquefaction hazards of electrical substations and dams. Immediately after the earthquake, I conducted post-earthquake investigations of the electrical transmission lines and substations. And that was my first experience as a professional to think about the importance of lifelines. But just as a citizen, I also saw how important lifelines in the region are. And just with 12 seconds of shaking, there was damage 60 miles away. The San Francisco Bay Bridge, the decks didn't have enough bearings seat, and so you can see a collapse there of that single deck on the left, and then the marine, and that shut down traffic like throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. And then in San Francisco, the Marina District had extensive liquefaction damage, and the natural gas pipelines broke, which also broke the water lines, and so the fire couldn't be put out. So I saw, really how important Lifeline systems are, and also saw how long it took to recover from that disaster. So that solidified my interest in Lifeline infrastructure. And over the decades, I've been to a number of places around the world with the ASCE earthquake investigation teams to do post-disaster investigations of earthquakes and tsunamis. And it's really to evaluate what performs well and what doesn't perform well during earthquakes. And so we can improve our understanding and improve our building codes. I can tell you that every single investigation is a very intense experience. Being in the aftermath of disasters and seeing the failed infrastructure and the hardships that people are going through um, is really a pretty moving event, and it has motivated me to work on improving our Lifeline systems. So I'd like to share a little bit of what I know with you here. So what is Lifeline infrastructure? It's civil engineers consider these systems Lifeline infrastructure: liquid fuel, natural gas, water, wastewater, electricity, transportation, and communications. Each sector is multifaceted. With transportation, it's not just about roads, it's multimodal. You also have transportation by air, and sea and land. And during disasters, when these systems are damaged, it prolongs the disaster. The longer the downtime of the services, the bigger the disaster. So as a society, we have inherited complex Lifeline systems that oftentimes have been built to various different design standards over many generations, and there are many deficiencies. So although Lifeline systems are critically important for community resilience, they are not ready for disasters. During disasters, when roads are damaged, when the power is out, communication is down, emergency response is severely compromised, and communities can never recover without utility services or transportation networks. So if we're serious about minimizing disasters, we need to design our lifelines better. We need to know how to operate them as interconnected systems. We need to invest in them more. The good news is that in general, when you invest in Lifeline infrastructure mitigation, the benefit cost ratios are generally very favorable. So it's a good investment. So my point here is that without corrective actions on our Lifeline systems, natural disasters will continue to be more frequent and get worse. Okay, so this is Lifeline systems at a glance. You can see in the middle that the community relies on all these systems that we just mentioned, and all these systems have their own characteristics. So if you think about water, it's a very linear supply chain with the reservoir that takes the water and pipes things through and delivers it to you, versus, say, communication networks where you can flow electrons in either direction, and there's multiple pathways. So during blue sky days, I don't know if today would be called a blue sky day, but on normal conditions, this network of systems operates in a coordinated and integrated manner, and their performance of delivering services to our communities is reliable, In fact, it's an amazing network of systems that works together. Um, but the thing about Lifeline systems is they've been built independently from each other, and they haven't been explicitly designed to function together. And they are connected, but over the years, I've learned that um, this interconnection can be broken during disasters and can cause very long downtimes. So we build lifelines in everywhere, oftentimes in hazardous places because they need to be. These are some port facilities that have been damaged in an earthquake. You can see some liquefaction damage. I'm standing here on the left side. Um, this, but our ports, if it are also subject to storm surges and tsunamis. In this case, it's liquefaction failure. We build really almost all of our wastewater systems by water bodies in the floodplain so that they can get the processed wastewater out quickly to a water body. But oftentimes they're built on liquefiable soils. In fact, I have never been on an earthquake investigation where the wastewater treatment plant hasn't been extensively damaged. We also build on lots of hazardous ground. We build on floodplains, next to water bodies, where there's liquefaction hazards like you see here. On the photo on the left is a picture of me in Japan where that ground used to be flat. And after the earthquake, the ground moved out, leaving that big slope. And the picture on the right is a different earthquake in Japan. I'm standing there where that tank used to be in the ground. And due to liquefaction and buoyancy, it popped up out of the ground. So this is the type of damage we might expect to see here in the Portland area because we're at the confluence of the Willamette River and Columbia River. We have bridges, airports, ports, wastewater treatment plants, fuel tanks, and so on liquefiable hazards. We also build a lot underground. And oftentimes we're not very good at maintaining our buried infrastructure for just deferred maintenance. In Japan, they have like short design. They have 40-year design lives for water pipes, and they have a pretty stringent pipeline replacement program. And if you contrast that with us, it's our common practice to just wait until something breaks. We build a lot of our lifelines in the same easements together. They're co-located. So if one of them breaks, it can be a long time before you can actually figure out where the damage occurred. And if you have another lifeline right next to it, then the one that broke can often damage the one right next to it. So what you're seeing here is a transmission backbone of a water system, and it failed another major pipeline. So widespread damage. Lifelines can also have a very far-reaching impact. Perhaps some of you were in the 2007 Great Gale Storm here in the Pacific Northwest, and this is just some riverine erosion during that storm. You can see a bridge and a rail line that have been scoured and damaged, and there's also this other line here, which is a fiber optic line. And during the storm, the fiber optic line was damaged and it cut communications, not just locally, but all the way across the Pacific Ocean to Australia. So far-reaching impacts. There are a lot of dependencies on Lifeline systems, physical dependencies, such as the co-located pipes that I showed. And there's also physical dependencies. So you can see that it's when like one system depends on the other to operate. You can see the communication system relies on electricity, and here the electrical control systems rely on communication. And if you think about it, really, most of our systems rely heavily on electricity and also more and more on communication systems. Let's see. So, Lifeline systems are also, they're connected to each other. So this is just an image to show you that connection. So if your electricity, if you want to restore your electricity, you're going to need to reopen your roads. If they're damaged, that's going to slow things down, but you need them to restore your fuel supplies and so on. You get the picture. During earthquake disasters and other types of disasters too, but especially I would say earthquake disasters, it's possible for all of the Lifeline sectors to have damage at the same time. And so it's very common to have fuel shortages, contaminated water that leads to health problems, blackouts or brownouts that can be quite extensive, choke points where bridges go down, so choke points in transportation, a surge in calls. And even if there is no damage to the communication systems, just that surge in the call overwhelms them, the communication systems. So after the disaster, there's a period of emergency response. There's ways to provide temporary services. So looking at all of these, you can have more fuel on site for local supply. You can provide mobile pure water purification units, emergency generators, temporary bridges can be erected. You can bring in cells on wheels or cows. So you have this cycle of our lifelines working during normal conditions, disaster conditions where things are broken, and there are ways to provide temporary services. But I wanted to point out that even with temporary measures, you're not going to be able to actually fully recover until you have your Lifeline services restored. So the length of time that it takes you to get your Lifeline services restored will influence the severity of the disaster. So lifelines are important. Lifeline damage can have this snowball effect where it can lead to really catastrophic social political impacts. So one system can break, and that in turn can continue to feed and grow into a bigger disaster. So after Hurricane Helene, for example, there was a really widespread lack of power, over 2 million people without power. The power doesn't go to the water systems. There's a lack of availability of clean water that causes people to get sick. At the same time, with that power outage, communications is down. Hospitals are compromised. 6 hospitals in Florida had to evacuate. So this is the type of snowball effect that can happen when you don't have reliable lifelines. So the good news is that there are lots of ways to mitigate for natural hazards. And seismic, for example, you want to increase the shear strength of the structure. With flooding, I have an example here. You know, the Alan talked about this dry proofing and wet proofing. I have kind of three broad categories of flood protection that you see here. One is to add a flood wall. Two is to elevate a structure. And three is to relocate a structure. On the left here, you see electrical substation. And, you know, it's never good, never good when you have water and electricity like this. And so we can build flood walls around our electrical substations. I have to say that there's really a lot of electrical substations in flood zones because the floodplains were cheap land, and so that's where a lot of them were built. We can also do things like provide for temporary measures, emergency power, for example. On the left here, you can see that after the storm Uri in Texas, where they had a massive power outage, the Texas legislature passed a law that says that all water districts need to have emergency generators because their water situation was so bad. In California, they passed a law that said all cell towers need to have 72-hour backup. And we can do things like this. It's been done elsewhere. It hasn't been done here. Kurt talked about, you know, the difficulties with communicating during wildfires. Think of all the power outages, like planned, power outages during wildfires to prevent, worse wildfires. We should be thinking about requiring backup, longer backup power, or any backup power to our communication systems. The Portland runway is on liquefiable soil. Not surprising, it's right along the Columbia River. That soil is loose, sandy soil that's water saturated, and when you shake it, it can temporarily turn into a liquid. That's not good for a runway. They at PDX want to improve 6,000 feet of runway so that it will be available to us, the region after an earthquake. And they did a benefit cost analysis to see if it would be worthwhile to do that. Doing ground improvement for liquefaction is expensive, but they found that there's a 50-to-1 benefit cost ratio to do that improvement. So in general, improving our Lifeline infrastructure has a high benefit cost ratio. Certainly not this high, this is very high, but the point is that Lifeline services are highly valued. The group that did this evaluation is the National Institute of Building Sciences, or NIBS. Kent mentioned this group during his talk. NIBS just started last year a new Lifelines organization within it. And so I just wanted to let you know about it. It's a public-private partnership to assist the nation with community resilience and recovery after disasters. It's for all hazards and all major lifeline systems. This is just a picture to show you the founding members that met earlier this year at the National Press Club. I just circled SEFT here. Kent Yu is the president of SEFT and has been very instrumental in getting this organization launched. Here's another activity earlier this year by that same NIBS group. This is a congressional briefing that they organized to encourage Congress to reauthorize the Earthquake Act and the Wind Act. So they're called NEHRP and NWRP. But you can see here that their top two recommendations, both of them involve Lifeline infrastructure. Oh, that's a picture of me standing there too. Here are the congressional briefing co-sponsors. And I wanted to show you that AIA sponsored this on a national level. So yay, AIA. So think about getting involved with that group. Okay, now I'd like to move on to the second part of my talk. We talked about the importance of Lifeline infrastructure and that it's deficient. We should be investing in it so that we can actually minimize our disasters and make sure that we can recover from disasters quicker. Here I'm switching to talking about two of the most dangerous places that I think there are in Oregon as far as natural disasters, and they're both tied to a Cascadia earthquake. So the first one will address the coastal tsunamis, and the second top danger zone is the critical energy infrastructure hub, which is in Portland. I wanted to say that when it comes to earthquakes and Cascadia earthquakes and tsunamis, which Jay talked about, we've really come a long way. And in my opinion, in the past 30 years, which I've worked on this, these are the 4 milestones. One, in 1994, the building code was changed in a fundamental way to address require ductility, seismic provisions in the building code. And so, as you know, building codes are our first line of defense. If we don't have good building codes, then the buildings go up without some important safety features. The second major milestone is a study that I led in 1999, and it was a statewide assessment of what kind of damage and loss we would have in a major Cascadia earthquake. And you can see this image here. At that time, GIS was rather new, and you can see the different layers involved. But the point is that the outcome wasn't good. We're going to expect to have high damages and losses. And that really allowed the state of Oregon to move forward with some important advancements on reducing risk. So they started right away. The state started right away to focus on schools and emergency facilities because you want your school children to be safe. They're mandated to go to school, and you want them coming home every day, even after an earthquake. And you also want your emergency services to work with a disaster or without a disaster. You just want them to work. And by 2009, so it took a while, there was stuff going on the entire time to make this happen. But there was a very successful grant program that was started and is still in existence. It helps to fund seismically deficient schools and emergency facilities. There's been close to $800 million that has been spent on that, and hundreds of thousands of people protected. The fourth milestone is the 2013 Oregon Resilience Plan. This was led by Kent Yu, the last speaker in this series, or the previous speaker in this series. I'm the last speaker. And this included a gap analysis of the existing infrastructure and the expected service downtimes for like electricity, roads, schools, water, so forth. And they are very long downtimes. So one thing that was done, knowing that you can't fix all your infrastructure at one time, it's very expensive. People need to get prepared. So the time frame for people to be ready, like self-sufficient, it used to be 72 hours, and after this came out, it was extended to 3 weeks. So this was the important milestone that pushed Oregon and others to really prepare people to be ready for on their own 2 to 3 weeks. And then this work has led to lots of other good work. So those were some milestones. Unfortunately, we still have a very long way to go. I'll talk about these two zones. Along the coast, the tsunami is expected to cause a lot of damage. At the same time, the coast is going to be geographically isolated due to bridges that are down and landslides across the coast range. It's going to be impassable to drive across the coast range. And what you see here on the right is a Highway 101 bridge. You can tell, hopefully, that it's horrible. It's very deficient. It wouldn't survive lateral shaking very well. And not only would the bridge come down, it would, you can see this lifelines hung on it. It would sever other lifeline services like water and we often string lots of different lifelines on our bridges, even if our bridges are deficient like this. On the coast, we expect to have about 20,000 casualties in the state of Oregon. You can see the map here showing number of casualties basically. And on the north coast, the geography is such that we have low-lying coastal plains, and we build on them like the town of Seaside. So you have really a lot of people who are exposed to tsunami hazards. In contrast, on the south coast, the land comes up right away into steep slopes, and you don't have as many people exposed there. So this is just a table showing a breakdown by county of the expected injuries and fatalities. You may notice that most of the casualties are actually fatalities, not injuries. And it's because if you get hit by just a little bit of tsunami, a foot or so, it is very likely you won't make it out. So that is why it is so important that you know how to get to high ground very quickly. I actually, when I worked for the state of Oregon, didn't realize how important it was to get to safety. In an earthquake, you're told to drop cover and hold on to protect yourself from the shaking and things falling. And for a tsunami, go to high ground. It wasn't until the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that I visited where I realized this is really serious. Like a tsunami is very, very destructive. That tsunami killed almost 250,000 people, and it was very powerful. So I became a big believer that we should be preparing better. And I believe that we should have vertical evacuation structures so that if you can't get out of the tsunami zone by foot, if it's too far or there's other problems along the way, then you should be able to evacuate up, surrounded by tsunami waters, but up so that you are safe and above the waters. I talked to a Japanese tsunami scientist a couple weeks ago and asked him, how many tsunami vertical evacuation structures do you have in Japan? And he said, I don't know. We have hundreds of them. And it's kind of like if we said, how many tornado shelters are there in Kansas? You can't count them. But for us in the Pacific Northwest, we only have 3 vertical evacuation structures, and you're looking at 2 of them. The one on the left is in Newport. It's part of OSU, and it's my favorite building. It is designed so well. And the one on the right is a tower in Washington. So it's not a building, it's just a dedicated tower for tsunami vertical evacuation. This is an opportunity that we in the A&E community, have. We could be designing and building and putting up prefab tsunami towers. And I think it makes a lot of sense because they can be done more affordably than if they were designed one by one. They can be done more reliably. A lot of the work is done in a controlled environment the prefab part, and they can be modular and scalable. So this is we have a design concept team that involves the folks listed here, and I wanted to point out that Jay Raskin came up with these conceptual designs to show that they can in fact be modular. They can be designed so that you can make them, shorter, taller, bigger, have more people protected and so forth. I'm doing some work on a national level looking at all the tsunami hazards with a team of folks, and we probably need about 22 towers in Oregon and about 58 in Washington to protect everybody, and that would require each tower to have a capacity of over 1,000 people. Okay, so that's a great opportunity that where we could save, many thousands of people if we changed our landscape to include tsunami vertical evacuation. The second danger zone I wanted to mention is the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. I did a study starting in 2007 when I worked at Dogami along with the Oregon Department of Energy and the Oregon PUC. It was a statewide study looking at multi-hazards focused on the energy sector. So that's liquid fuel, natural gas, and electricity. And what we did is we identified a critically important and vulnerable area in Oregon and named it the CEI Hub. And what it is a 6-mile stretch along the lower Willamette River, just downstream from downtown Portland, with important energy facilities, including petroleum fuel terminals. And the real issue is that it's all on highly liquefiable soils. This soil is a largely hydraulic fill, where that soil was in the middle of the riverbed and it got pumped up on the side of the Portland West Hills, and then we built on them. So the report for that study came out in 2013, and the key finding is that a Cascadia magnitude 9 earthquake poses a very high risk to the CEI Hub, and that area was not built to survive earthquakes, and it can endanger the areas nearby, like with oil spills and fires, as well as endanger the entire state of Oregon, because that area is where almost all of the fuel goes through before it's distributed through the state of Oregon. And so if that area fails, then we would have very prolonged fuel shortages for the state of Oregon. So it's like a single point of failure. We have all of our eggs in that one basket there. The good news is that there is mitigation underway. Since 2013, the PUC started to regulate the investor-owned utilities of electricity and natural gas. So they know that they need to address seismic safety. And it took a long time. It wasn't until 2 years ago when DEQ started to regulate the bulk fuel terminals in that area. And there's an aggressive goal in that those terminals have to do seismic vulnerability studies and develop mitigation plans based on the results of those seismic vulnerability studies. And if you check the DEQ website, you can see that all of the regulated companies, bulk fuel companies, have submitted seismic vulnerability studies. So this is what that area looks like. You can see the fuel tanks are really right next to the Willamette River. So oil spills can happen into the river with bad conditions. They can harm nearby houses. There's houses just right across the street, the highway. And the trees and the oil can burn. There's really a lot of fuel load there with the Washington, Forest Park. So I think it's very important that we don't end up looking anything like this, which can happen. I was the person in the lead role after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake on liquid fuel and natural gas, and really bad things happened there. Not just Fukushima, which was really bad. So we want to make sure we don't have fuel shortages, fuel insecurity, no spills, no fires. So this is my last slide. In conclusion, I think that we need to think about investing in our Lifeline infrastructure and doing it strategically, prioritizing what we invest in, and share some ideas there. And the other thing is we need to improve the safety in these two hazardous, very dangerous places. The coast, where people can't get to high ground, we need to provide some option like vertical evacuation. And the critical energy infrastructure hub, there's plenty of things we can do, like provide better warning systems, better fire protection, better spill control. I've been working with Senator Merkley, who has taken an interest in this, and he has provided some direction for the EPA to do a better job with the spill control and to work with our community here. So we're excited about that. And also this area where we divest from liquid fuel, we'll always need some, but we should be thinking about having an energy secure transition plan for the CEI. Okay, well, with that, I'd like to thank you. Okay, shall I pass it off to somebody?
Are we ready to just start the Q&A?
Sure. Does anyone have any questions, or should I pass it off to Jay?
So there's a question in the chat box from Kathy Austin. It says, would it be feasible to transfer the energy hub entirely into Central Oregon?
Is anyone else experiencing audio cutoffs?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Huh.
So it is not feasible to move the entire energy, the fuel facilities to Central Oregon. And the reason is that there's two ways that the fuel comes in bulk to the CEI hub. One is by barge or ship, and you go up the Willamette River and you offload through the ports and wharves there, and you can't do that in Central Oregon. And the other way is by pipeline. There's a transmission pipe that comes from Washington State, from the refineries, and delivers fuel there. And from the CEI hub, it's distributed out. So if you can imagine, if somebody wanted to build a big oil transmission pipe by you, what would happen? It is I would say impossible. It would be very difficult to have a new pipeline, oil pipeline, transmission pipeline, corridor approved and have a oil pipeline built to Central Oregon. However, with that said, I mentioned Senate Bill 1567 that required DEQ to regulate the bulk fuel terminals, which they're doing. The second part of Senate Bill 1567, it was the 2002 version. I helped write it with Senator Michael Dembrow. That second part requires the Oregon Department of Energy to write an energy security plan for the state of Oregon. And just earlier this month, or I think it was earlier this month, it might have been like late last month, the Department of Energy issued their energy security plan. And they are big proponents, as others have been over the years, to geographically diversify the fuel supplies in Oregon so that communities are not so dependent on this just-in-time delivery. So it's like having more food in your pantry. You don't use more fuel, you just have like a bigger stockpile nearby. So that would provide a bigger buffer. I'm working with Senator Dembro on actually 4 additional bills for the 2025 session. And one of those bills is to actually begin implementation of geographic diversity of fuel supplies. And so that would mean taking places that already store fuel, like maintenance yards, motor pools, airports, places that have fuel tanks, and increase the capacity across the state so that the fuel is available locally. You cannot recover from a disaster without liquid fuel at this point in time or anywhere in the near future. So that's some of the things being done. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. I will hand it to you, Jay.
Thank you, Yume. That was a really great final presentation in the series. I note as your earth, wind, fire, and water demonstrates, there are a full range of hazards that we have to plan for and be aware of and anticipate too, that that many of these that we've been designing for often aren't going to meet our future conditions as well. And so there's always the need to adapt. And part of being resilience-based design is to be considering the future conditions and the changing social economic conditions that drive vulnerability and elevate risk as well. And so in being asked to be the moderator for this final collection of all of us here at the end, I've got a few questions that I prepared, and some of the panelists have submitted some questions too. I'm going to ask at least a couple of those, but I'd like to invite anyone else who's here, if you want to submit something, a question in the chat. We'll have those queued up because I'd love to hear from all of you, especially if you've participated or seen all of the sessions, to have a chance to ask questions that you may have. And so one question, Jay Raskin had submitted this one about how can we engage our communities and the state government to move forward on becoming resilient so that we're not building back better as we're picking up the pieces from not having done that earlier, which is basically, why do we have to wait for a disaster to happen and then replace a weak bridge with a stronger bridge? Because the loss of the bridge is going to really be a setback. And the Burnside Bridge is a perfect example of knowing that we have a 100-year-old bridge that's a deficit infrastructure lifeline, and that replacing it now so that it actually has enhanced capacity on a day-to-day basis, that it provides people with light rail and bicycling and a number of other amenities. Those are co-benefits, and then when the earthquake happens, we'll have a functioning emergency transportation route instead of a shell of a bridge, and then we'll have to wait and replace it along with all the other ones. So how would any of you who are on the panel choose to decide, how do we engage our local and state officials to move forward with more proactive resilience-based design? Any of you want to take that one on?
I guess I'll jump in and just say, as we, you shared about the benefit cost ratio for the runway at PDX, and I think that communicating that benefit cost ratio for many of the aspects of both public infrastructure as well as private commercial resources that we all depend on, and communicating, here's a plan for how we can collectively as a community invest in resilience in our communities so that we do not suffer the terrible setback we will face when the disaster strikes. So I think it's being upfront about, we have an opportunity to prepare, here's how we can do it together, as opposed to one party or another bearing the burden of making a huge investment in resilience. Would be the key to that communication.
Jay, I think one of the things that I've experienced this in my practice and working with a lot of communities, especially a lot of smaller communities, is that they recognize the needs of to serve their communities for a more resilient, healthier location or place. But this financial barriers are in the way, and so I don't know if this is a change, but I see more funding opportunities through grant and FEMA and other federal agencies to support communities. And so I think an example I mentioned in my presentation was the Lane County Resilient Hub program that's grant funded. It's actually an EPA grant, and it's developing resilient hubs in 7 communities in Lane County. Really are intended to be a post disaster recovery location. So I think it's recognizing the immediacy of when disasters occur, whether it's fire or whatever it is, earthquake. We need a place to be safe, and power and all the things that are necessary to sustain human life. So I think that's a positive step in being proactive and starting to think about those. It's kind of an equivalent to the idea of the evacuation centers on the coast that we saw earlier in the presentation, of having a place to go and to be able to, it's kind of a community-wide support. So it's probably the answer to most every question that we have, which is it comes down to money. And how do we get more?
Yeah, I mean, that's often the empowering aspect or the gatekeeper aspect is the funding. And I guess, one question I have when you talk about federal funding is I would love to find better ways to leverage federal funding for additional funding. One thing I don't see enough of is how federal funding programs work in concert with one another. Sometimes they're competing for similar resources, and so if there were better ways to bundle, say, HUD grants for housing with FEMA grants or EPA grants, or say with the Corps of Engineers and that's doing riverine work and doing flood buyouts or flood elevations in concert. I've asked that for a number of years to wish the federal government had a better way to help local communities align those types of efforts so you can maximize the effort, because grant management is burdensome. And part of what you see at local government is the capacity to even apply for grants, not to mention manage the grants. And so as someone who works at a local county, I only have so much bandwidth to just manage a few grants at a time. And so I'm impressed with what Lane County has accomplished. And it'll be interesting to see how they're implemented and how they're tested, because they have a lot of capacity in Lane County. And they get hit, it seems like a lot, between wildfires, snowstorms, floods on the McKenzie River corridor. So I feel like it's an opportune time to see how this turns out.
Yeah, I think I've been involved in a lot of the grant applications with the city of Oak Ridge on projects as well, and the challenge of submitting for grants, the complexities, the you get tripped up over a relatively minor oversight or something like that. We have a project or a grant where we were told to wait on starting the project until the grant was, if we did get the grant, until it was authorized. One of the reasons we didn't get the grant because we hadn't started the project yet. And so, it's like, what do you do with this information, right? So you're just, it's complicated, and I don't know that we're going to fix the federal government and everything else here, but I think it is one of the challenges with relying on grants is their complexities.
Yeah. Well, I see it. I can't go to the chat at the moment, but I'll use this example too. The HUD community development block grants. They lose their federal status when they're at the local level. And we, local governments can actually use that as the 25% match for FEMA grants. But what you find is the community program managers who have those, they've already outlined those for other things. So I've gone to the county in Clackamas County and said, can we use your 25% as a match for flood buyouts in these flood prone areas? And of course, they have all these housing problems that they have to deal with on a daily and annual basis, and so they're already basically spent, you know, well in advance. And so this just means more and more that there's a lot of competition for a limited amount of money, all for very good purposes too. I think when we talk about community resilience in the area that I work in a lot, I certainly advocate community resilience as a value system that informs a lot of this type decision making. It's not just setting kind of the standards, but the community needs to be in a position to expect and request resilience-based design because they understand why it's important to them and the co-benefits that come from that. Yume's got her hand.
Yeah, I was just going to address your question a bit. One thing that I think that we should all be doing is increasing the awareness of the vulnerabilities, and at that same time coming up with some viable solutions that are helpful. So it wasn't easy to get the grant program together to help school districts and emergency response facilities because it's very expensive to do seismic improvements. But one of the things that we did was I was working with Senator Courtney at that time, and we had a bill that became ballot measures that went to the people and asked them, do you want a constitutional change to allow legislators to borrow money for this purpose? There was overwhelming votes to allow for this constitutional change. It was, it's so much money that I believe that we shouldn't allow the legislators just to, decide to spend money like that. I think it's a good thing to ask the people. And when the people say yes, then it empowers the legislature to actually do something. So it, took some money and it took a while to set up a grant program, but that grant program has helped communities all across the state of Oregon. So anyway, I think that awareness is important, and I think that working with our politicals are important, and not expect them to know what to do, but work with them to figure out what should be done. Provide them support in a way that they can do something about the problems.
Yeah, that's a great example, and I remember voting for that myself. Jay Raskin.
Yeah, I was just gonna. There's one sector that is a real conundrum for me, and it's transportation. One of the outcomes of the Oregon Resilience Plan, there was a meeting where basically each of the task force work groups were asked what was the most important thing, and I expected that every individual work group would say, well, we're the most important, and that wasn't the case. Actually, everyone just said roads. We have to be able to get to where the damage is in order to repair it. And one of the big silences after the Oregon Resilience Plan has been that there's been no actual funding measure to fund actually a fairly good plan that ODOT has came up with about doing resilient roads. So it's they're doing what they can with the limited budget, but it's really complicated by the fact that gas taxes are down and the legislature is trying to figure out how to actually fund ODOT. But in none of the discussions I see, at least publicly, do they ever mention making a resilient road system to address Cascadia. So I think the challenge is how do we bring that discussion to the legislature?
Jay, I was a year ago, I served on a DLCD task force on a part of initiative from Senate Bill 762 of wildfire adaptive communities. And so this was specifically looking for our land use laws and DLCD's role in that to, what do they need to do in their processes and requirements to create a more resilient Oregon for particularly in wildfires. And what came out of that months of study was really, it was about vehicle access in and out of properties. And it was about the road system, and it was connecting properties to the road system. Part of this was, it was kind of a confined scope that they wanted to look at. But the issue is, and I think this is one of those topics like power and some of the other lifelines that we see, is that it is a vital, both in the short term and the long term, for any disaster, right? If you look at what was happening in the Holiday Farm fire on Highway 126 up the McKenzie Highway late at night, you had in the 2020 wildfires, you had a line of people leaving to go to beat the fire to head to Eugene, and then you had fire crews from all over the Willamette Valley coming up the other direction, right on a 2-lane highway. The number of people who drove out of there with scorched tires but made it was remarkable. Now imagine if some of those people would have either crashed or gotten in an accident, or some of those tires they weren't able to proceed with driving out, and then could have caused a traffic accident. It could have caused. There was one person who died during the fire, probably from a heart attack. But we're lucky that there wasn't more. And a lot of this has to do with just the importance of getting out and getting in simultaneously to respond to the fire and start to or whatever the disaster, and start to recover.
Yeah, I think the other thing that has struck me is that looking at the damage from Helene, because the number of roads and things that are that and being washed out or just no longer there is just phenomenal, and it's probably the closest example we'll have of what Cascadia will do to our road system. And I suppose the answer is to bring photos to the legislature and say this is what could happen.
I would agree with you, Jay Raskin, in that, if, like, how many of you have even talked to your own legislators, state legislators or federal legislators? If they don't hear from you and they don't know that you think this issue is important, they're not going to do anything.
That's a great point, Yume, and it kind of tees up one of the questions I had come up with. Let's see, as the design community, all of you who are participating on this call, not just the panelists, but the attendees, architects, engineers, planners, who are your strongest allies or partners in achieving community resilience? Because I think it's important to identify, when we're trying to tackle a really complex, multifaceted subject issue, especially across many hazards. Generally community resilience is a very broad topic. Who do you lean on? Who do you go to? Who backs you up? Who are the people that are your trusted allies, that when you need to, ask a favor or have someone else be, signing letters or coming to testify for all of you in this area? I'm just curious who that might be.
So I would, oh, sorry, Kent.
You-
You know, I was just gonna double down on, I think that we need to increase the awareness. So that means talking with the media and, you know, if it's never very fun talking to reporters. You have no idea what they're gonna say you said. And then also working with our policymakers. I know that I have spent the last 2 years working with Senator Merkley, U.S. Senator Merkley's staff about the critical energy infrastructure hub and saying that, look, this is a bigger problem than just the state. The state has already done this, very impressive DEQ regulatory program, but there are still dangers out there and it's not going to be solved by the state. It's too big. The feds need to help. And they did this like really amazing thing where in the 25 fiscal 25 budget, they have money and a directive to the EPA to focus on this oil spill area safety. It's specifically the CEI hub. So was it, did it take a super long time? Was it super frustrating? Did I have to say the same thing over and over, blah, 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 blah. Absolutely. And is it, clear that we're even going to have a budget? It's probably going to be a continuing resolution for a federal budget until next year after the election. But if you are, and that was really pretty much just me. Imagine if all of us, I mean, engineers and architects are very trusted for being, honest and straight shooters and, looking after the public good. If we worked as a force together, we would get so much further.
Thanks, Yume. Kent.
Hey, thanks, Jay. I'd like to definitely echo what Yume is saying, raising awareness. I was thinking this from maybe a few sort of angles to tackle this. One thing is the emergency management. In my mind is we architects, engineers, planners, we develop a community, and we don't engage in emergency management. They are kind of on their own. We do everything within our own silo, but we expect them to pick up the pieces after a disaster. And I think having them on the table, at the beginning, I think would be really helpful. And so when we did the Beaverton School District project, we invited the Washington County and also the local city emergency management, talking about if we want to recover, if we want to respond, what are your needs are, and so then we can bring them on board. So that's one thing I think we oftentimes we forget about them until disaster happens, that we engage them. So that's one. The other thing is also, when we look at the resilience, look at the community impact, we look at the impact on the social side, also look at the impact on the business side, economic side. We really need to engage the business community. And I was reading some of the business articles, over the past several years. And I found it's very interesting is that business community consider resilience as a competitive edge, as opposed to, for us, it's like a defense mechanism. They feel like if they can make their organization, make their facility more resilient, and they are going to be relatively ahead of their competition, and they can take more market share. I think we need to reach out to our business community in Oregon, and we have lots of global businesses, big business, and we can reach out to them and make sure they understand. So next time when they build their campus, expanding their facility, when they talk to architects, engineers, they already factor in the resilience cost in the project. And another piece I talk about the private sector, and then last piece I want to touch on is the public sector. Public sector is really important because if you want a private sector to do something, oftentimes you say what a public sector is doing. I think public sector needs to take a leadership and sending a strong signal to the society, that public sector, we as a society, we value resilience. So, when our government, when the public sector lease buildings from private sector, we want to make sure that those buildings will meet certain performance level. They are not in flood zone. They are, I think that that's something we need to do. And also when our state build their new buildings, I think they should design their building to a high standards and sending the signal to the society. So those are the three things I want to just, add to what Yume has said.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I applaud the state treasury building is a great example of leading by example in that regard. Alan, you've got a hand.
Absolutely. I just want to build on good points from the other panelists and building on, especially on the private sector piece. One of the key things that a trend that's happening, and it's not taking over yet, but it's going to be here soon. Lenders and real estate investors are both starting to look at natural hazard and climate related resilience as a factor in funding or investing in projects, whether it be a new construction or purchasing of an existing building. And when they look at that, they're not just looking at the resilience of the building or asset itself, but also the public infrastructure that serves it. Are the roads going to wash out or flood that serve it, or will there be power, sewer, water, communications? So that's going to drive values and decisions on development projects. And we put that together with the fact that AIA now makes it part of a architect standard of care to inform their clients about climate and resilience related risks in a project. And that doesn't mean that they have to do anything about it. We just have to inform them, and they can choose to spend the money or not. But part of that informing them is 3 to 5 years down the line, when they go to sell it, the investor who will be buying it will be looking at those factors and will devalue that property if resilience has not been considered in it. And so while those economic factors start to take effect, that means that the business community, the real estate investment community, will then be putting a value in lobbying for public investment in resilience, as well as a maybe more level playing field for making private investment in resilient part of standard practice.
Yeah, that's great. And on top of the real estate partners, the insurance side of things, we've got governor's office and kind of some state mandates for opening up more opportunities for housing development to deal with the shortages we have. And we're building more into hazard-prone areas like the wildland-urban interface and potentially in floodplains. And then you think, well, we can build all these, but are they going to be able to get an insurance policy in some of these places? Is the criticality of the coverage affordable based on the risk? Are the insurers willing to expose themselves to these areas as some of them have been pulling out of some of these markets just for the very reason. So I'm glad that the State Department of Insurance has gotten more engaged for public awareness after the wildfires. And when we've had wildfire preparedness fairs in Clackamas County, we've been very happy to see the state insurance office at these talking about what is and isn't factual and assuaging some of the fears and helping people have a better idea of how to address their coverage questions too, because if you're underinsured and you have a disaster, you're sunk one way or the other.
Yeah, I think
that's a great point, Jade. I'm not far from being an expert in insurance, but I've heard anecdotes out of Florida that while an insurer will not necessarily give you lower rates if you invest in resilience, they will not give you double-digit increases. Or perhaps give you insurance versus not give it to you if you've invested in resilience. So I think that that's going to drive decision making.
well,
I'll just say my last point on this is I do recall there was a conundrum about earthquake insurance a while back, and it seemed like there were a number of companies that wouldn't insure your old home unless it was retrofitted. Why would they give you a policy if they knew your house was going to fail in an earthquake? They want to make sure that you've done the work to make the house protected in order for them to feel comfortable providing an insurance policy. Sorry, Kurt, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think in the insurance industry is certainly nobody's friend, but they're also an organization or an entity that might be able to persuade those who are elected to think about climate action and some of the long-term financial cost that they're unwilling to spend because they're going to lose insurance. And the insurance, I think that the insurance industry has access to probably as much data as any entity about risk. They're also funding a tremendous amount of research that can, to help with more fire-resistant structures and those kinds of things. So I think that they are a resource that will hopefully be of value to help us make better policy decisions, both individually and as public agencies and businesses.
That's great. I have another question queued up, and it's kind of related. What challenges or impediments do you see for improving the adoption of stronger codes or standards that enhance community resilience? And an anecdote that came to me when I used to work at the state and was kind of the administrator for OSPAC was, and you may mention when we were adopting the codes back in the early 90s. I thought I had heard that there were the building community was fighting those code adoptions, and I still hear that with some of the construction companies when you talk about the cost of doing a higher seismic standard or some of these other improvements, they push back on it. And even though it does, they're usually pennies to nickels on the dollar, and they add so much in value, and for this case of minimizing damage and improving repairability. For many of us, it seems like a clear win with the benefit cost analysis, but I still wonder why so many builders are averse to to these types of improvements at kind of a baseline business model decision making. Or any other examples if you have them.
Well, I mean, it's, being involved in legislative activities in the state for a long time, we've seen segments of the building community have resisted every form of a code modification, whether it's an energy code upgrade or anything. And I think that's just a natural part of the politics of the life we're in. So yeah, to me, that's an important one. I think that, we've all been involved, people in this panel, and seeing that proposed requirements that make some form of a declaration that someone's property is less valuable or more risky has seen a significant amount of pushback. I mentioned the wildlife urban interface maps that were unveiled last year, and the significant pushback. They start to show your property is more, is a hazard. And that's taken, those maps were important because they triggered other requirements. So that's probably going to be a 2-year delay in those requirements going to effect because of this unreasonable negative response to the fact that your dry grass, dry treed property might catch on fire, right? Seems kind of obvious. We also saw in Portland when the unreinforced masonry declaration requirement went into effect, that there was, that got withdrawn because of the public reaction to it. When there was some coastal tsunami standards a few years ago, I don't remember exactly what they were, but we saw the coastal delegation just, rise up and oppose it, even though many of them they're not just, both Democrats and Republicans. So I think we just see, the negative reaction to ideas or proposals that are going to say will make somebody's property less valuable.
Yeah, I termed the repeal of the tsunami line that was originally a 1995 law proposed by the senator who was sitting on the State Seismic Commission at the time. as well as the failure of the unreinforced masonry policy. To me, those were, I thought of them as almost a resilience backlash, from the legislature, that because we had made such a strong entree with the Oregon Resilience Plan in 2013, and the first full session, we had gotten lots of investments and a state resilience officer, and we're striding forward. But I think the momentum kind of comes and goes with so many things that are political in terms of the appetites and the opportunities. And I still don't know quite the rationale for why it was so necessary for the coastal caucus to repeal the tsunami line, but they were hell bent to do it, and they went to great lengths to do it. And I think it was a muscle flexing exercise, frankly. But I feel like maybe we can, especially after all the wildfires, I think that's created a stronger appetite and awareness with the public and the elected officials. Albeit, the hard thing about this, and I think this is an important point as someone who works in government, is if you make a misstep, you really set yourself up for blowing your trust with the public, and it's hard to recover. It takes a long time to reestablish your credibility. And I feel like the first round of those maps, they really did fall on their face in the way they were rolled out, without a lot of explanation and coordination. And then the second round, those were improvements, but I work with a number of local homeowners associations up on the Highway 26 corridor by Mount Hood who have lots of really hard questions about the way those maps were done this time, and how arbitrary they feel like some of the lines are, even if mathematically you can argue why they're that way. And so it goes back again to how you say it, who you say it to, when you say it, the way that you roll out information. You can set up the expectations for success or failure. And marketing and communication and engagement, you can't understate how important it is, in the way that works to either make a win or a lose in the public, the public's opinion. Any other comments in this area, Jay?
Slightly different. I think that the AIA actually may have a role to play in helping that out. I've observed that most people have difficulty imagining what a resilient community would look like. For wildfires, it's how do you do what does something look like when you do the fire measures in the community, and changing the roads to get for better access. What happens for flooding? In the tsunamis, what happens on the coast when a tsunami comes in? How do you what is your community going to look like afterwards, and how are you going to rebuild and even recover? And I think the AIA has a model called regional and urban design assistance teams, and they've added something called the sustainable assistance team. And I think that it's maybe time for Oregon to maybe make a request of the national to have a resilience design assistant team, and maybe take four types of communities within the state and bring this kind of wide look about getting designers, communities, other specialists to basically take a look and provide listen to community members and find out what they think, present what the expertise that's gathered about what the issues are, and then give it a physical form for people to actually look at what these things are or could be.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the EPA also has a resilience toolkit that they rolled out a few years ago, and Portland was a kind of a test pilot for that. But I think a lot of it's focused on rural versus urban communities, rural communities that may have low capacity. But I think there's a need out there, both for visioning and for implementation. And I know, as someone who sat on the review panel at the state last year for the 2023 Building Resilience in Communities grant program, there's a lot of scrutiny about how well communities meet the Justice 40 requirements for federal grants, for how you track marginalized and underrepresented communities. And urban areas just have a big advantage over rural areas for how they do that and the capacity to do that. And so the need at the rural level for a lot of this kind of technical assistance and capacity support is a given. It's always there. Kurt, did you have or you may?
I'll go. I just wanted to pick up on the URM discussion, the unreinforced masonry discussion. And I think everybody here knows that they're buildings that are largely under reinforced and oftentimes brick, and in low levels of earthquake shaking, they can collapse and kill a bunch of people. And in the city of Portland worked on a program where they plan to mandate retrofitting of URMs. And I think that it was unfair. And there's a disproportionate burden on people who are disadvantaged without the ability to fund something like that. So when there are problems, societal problems like this, I think it's important to make sure you're looking at who is being affected and what they think and what they need to make this happen, because I don't think that they want to be in unreinforced buildings that are dangerous, but they don't have the money to fix it. And so, as an occupancy type like schools and emergency facilities, it was decided upon by the, people, the citizens of Oregon to vote on that matter. And with URMs, I think it's something that also could be addressed at a state level in a much more, palatable way. And one thing that would need to be done is to get your arms around the problem and figure out where are the URMs, what is the size of the problem, and to come up with an inventory seems to be the type of thing that AIA members could do to put things in context, to help come up with solutions.
Another aspect of that is actually social resilience. And it's been quite interesting to see that the research being done on social resilience and recovery efforts is such that basically it's of equal importance really to the built environment. That the communities that basically where people know their neighbors and have a lot of social cohesion basically do much better than communities that where it's weaker. So and it means actually investing in things that one wouldn't think of as resilience, which are creating those spaces where people get to know each other. So parks, libraries, community centers, these things actually have a strong relationship to how well the community actually recovers afterwards.
I'll plug that point that Jay Raskin made, because I think you were there at the last Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission meeting. Dr. Daniel Aldrich gave a presentation on social cohesion and disaster resilience, and he's one of the leaders going back a couple of decades on studying this particular area and making those points. And they're going to post that presentation that was recorded on the OSPAC website. And if you have some time, it's certainly a worthwhile effort for about a half an hour to go in and check that out. Alan.
First of all, I want to just acknowledge, I couldn't agree more, Yume, with your comments and also what you added on, Jay, in terms of the social resilience. And just to build on that, I feel like those URMs in many of our communities, at downtown Portland, other Oregon downtown areas, are part of the historic and character defining feature. They're what make those places special. And so in addition to talking about the resilience value and the social value, there's also a character value that we can be talking about and build support for collective and public funding of URM's resilience assessments. And so I think that we should be emphasizing that value as well as everything else to build support for the type of resilience investments we need to make in these communities.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've done a number of those presentations as a lecturing fellow with the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute, where I get invited to their student chapters to talk about the subject I do is the Oregon Resilience Plan. And I talk about how it's been implemented at a policy program and project level. And when I talk about that program in Portland as a very teachable moment, you know, it's the concern and fear that of a lot of the building owners were that the earthquake isn't the disaster, it's gentrification that they're worried about, because the economics of all of that work basically means the fear that their tenants can't rehome there because everything goes up. And so despite the technical work that the city did and the funding for how to pay for some of it, yeah, that unfortunately it was those expectations and understandings of the different owners of what it all meant, and in the current economic conditions that that created a jeopardy for all of them to participate. Anyway, did you have your hand up, Yume?
Yeah, I kind of lost track, but one thing that I know that will happen in the next legislative session is there will be a bill that will be written to help honor Senator Peter Courtney for the work that he did to protect schools and school children in emergency response facilities. I worked with him for over 10 years on over a dozen bills to get the grant programs going. But after the grant programs are going, you still need to get money into the budget every year. You have to take out debt. There still wasn't very much, the schools were not required to report in on their seismic safety, even though there's laws that say they need to be seismically safe. So there will be, and he passed away in July, and I was working with the legislature on making sure that the grant programs are named in his honor, and that there would be plaques required in front of the buildings that have been seismically retrofitted. So oftentimes we talk about putting up plaques when there's dangerous buildings. This would be the reverse. And so it's a bit of an incentive and an awareness approach. I have no idea if that bill is going to actually, get written and passed, but I would say that it would be a good thing for AIA members to support it if possible, if you agree with it, and at that time bring up any other AIA agreed upon ideas, like perhaps coming up with a URM inventory for the state. As Alan was saying, all of the historic districts in all of the little towns across all of Oregon have a whole bunch of URMs. Those are the ones that are going to get hit. It's statewide. It's not a Portland issue. So I think that there are a lot of ways to go in and talk to the legislature about the importance of these types of issues to you, and ask for additional efforts on their part.
I know in some of the roles I've had about advocacy for earthquake codes and retrofits, I've urged at different times that perhaps a district scale of retrofitting is probably a more cost-effective way of offsetting the burden, rather than doing it at a building by building basis. I know that probably doesn't work everywhere, but if you think about it, when this earthquake happens, you're going to lose a lot of the historical value in so many of these areas from these buildings that you know, whatever value they hold for the history of these cities and these little strips, you know, along the Sandy or in Old Town, you know, if they're designated as historic places, it's not going to matter if they're a pile of bricks after the earthquake. But the fact that there was opposition from a number of the owners for the burden it would place on them, I feel like, unfortunately, the offsets of not doing something, there's a multiple scale of costs and burdens on the rest of the community for not doing the retrofits, you know, because an unsafe building threatens all the buildings around it to a scale of 1.5 times the height of that building. You know, you're going to have to close an entire district like they did in New Zealand if you've got a few buildings that are bad and cordon off streets. Who's going to pay for the debris removal? You know, what about the people who die on the sidewalk when the bricks fall off the facades? I feel like these owners are going to need a hand and some help to get them to where they need to be, because I think it is overwhelming to think of them having to bear the costs of all of the work that way.
Jay, before we jump into the questions in the chat about the safety assessment program, I just want to comment on how what a wonderful program the Seismic Rehabilitation Grant Program is. And it's a great example of multiple levels of wins, right? School districts all understand, for instance, smaller school districts, the importance of, you know, safety for their students, but the benefit of the way the grant program is structured is you get benefits to your school. You know, we need to improve the roof diaphragm. You're going to get a new roof. We need to put a new shear wall in. Let's put it here and make a better classroom. And so I think it's just been able to, and the fact that it's so available. I don't know if there's a school district left in Oregon that hasn't benefited from it. But I think it's just a really great story of a program that is successful and sustainable, and it benefits a lot of us.
What I don't hear enough people talking about is the peace of mind you have when you go into a retrofitted building and you feel safe. It means a lot to me when I see the cross bracing when I go into the Old Town U of O building, and it's very prominently displayed. When I got to go to the Seaside School that was built up on the hill, and you see all of the seismic bracing that's in there, man, that makes me sleep better at night, knowing it's there. So I feel like, you know, maybe we're not placarding the worst buildings, but you know, having searchlights out in the skies over all the buildings that did it right, so they get recognition for that. I do feel like we should celebrate those accomplishments very visually, because I think they add a lot of value at the community scale. We've got a few comments and questions that have come up about safety assessment programs, specifically the one that has recently been legislated into law in Oregon and is under the mantle of the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office. There's been a number of years that this has been in the works. I know when I was at OSPAC, we were trying to train the trainers from California to teach it, because they had it in California. It was a modified version of the Applied Technology Council 20 and 45 training programs. And then the state of Washington had adopted it through their building officials program. And so now we do have this in Oregon, and it's just getting off the ground. And it's really tied to buildings, but it's about post-disaster safety evaluations, where you're really looking at habitability and occupancy, and the process for conducting those evaluations, the certification program, the authority that comes with that, and credentialing. There's a lot of aspects to it that the local building officials really need to get their head around. This used to be a program that was overseen by the state division of building codes, but it lied fallow for a number of years, and they ultimately just decided they didn't want to do this anymore. And so it's really great that the fire marshal's office picked it up and is carrying the water for this right now. I see there is a link that's posted, and there was a recent training And so one of the hopes, based on how California did it, was professional organizations like this one would really help incentivize their members participating in getting certified, and helping to kind of usher that give and take that goes on there. And one thing I've asked the state fire marshal's office about is how to set up a program for, like right now in North Carolina or Florida. How can we send our trained certified folks over there to help do building evaluations, to support them and get on the ground experience here? They'll send fire chiefs down there to do work, but they haven't yet gotten it kind of codified so that all of these volunteers that participate would be on a short list to get us assigned that way too. I think it's doable. We just have to get it going. Jay Raskin.
A couple of things. One, the initial chat from Patricia, she was saying that it actually, there is a course line that you can do on AIA University. The other thing I would point out is that AIA Oregon was the leader in passing ORSAP through the using with Cindy Roberts, our lobbyist. So we're pretty involved and vetted in this effort. So, and I would encourage people to sign up to do that. There are protocols for going, but you're right. It's not very clear cut at the moment about how that actually works in specific instances.
And Jay's being modest. We got involved because of Jay, and so many things that have passed because of Jay. So Jay, thank you. Jay Raskin and Jay Wilson, thank you so much for your leadership in these areas.
All right. We're coming up on 10 till, and so I see messages that are still coming in. Looks like folks are having to look at their watches too. So any closing remarks?
You know, there's a question from Logan Cravens that was a bit ago, and I think it's kind of up on the chat. I'm going to read it because I think Logan is still here. And it is, what is the state of Oregon doing to require private and public utilities and infrastructure to operate interactively both during normal operations and during a hazard event, which is a great question. I'll throw out what I know about that, and I mentioned this in the wildfire presentation, is we've required the opposite related to power in the public safety power shutoff is required under certain weather conditions to reduce fire risk. And, so that's an important measure that's been put in place in protection, but it's also intended to keep utilities from, protecting utilities against themselves and getting sued because of the lack of maintenance of their utility lines causing fires. And so it's both a good and a bad thing. And it also means that there are times when there aren't fires, when there's a risk of fire, when it's very hot and possibly very smoky, that communities don't have access to power. And so, that's a challenging situation that's created its own new set of problems as we're navigating all of these situations in particularly our difficult summers.
This is actually typically governed by the Public Utility Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where these things get worked out. And it's sometimes pretty complex because part of the discussion is ratepayers, the rates. And so some of these issues cost money. And so there's a balance that the PUC tries to do between having too much of a cost of energy increase versus the public safety. So,
well, it's a real world issue for sure. And I'm dealing with it a lot on the Highway 26 corridor between Sandy and Government Camp, because those folks, they lose their power a lot during these public safety power shutoffs, especially with sustained east wind episodes. And they can go days without having phone or cell service, and they can't call 911 if they have an emergency. They can't receive a wildfire evacuation if they have no phone or internet or power. And they've been reaching out to their legislators because they found out that the Public Utility Commission doesn't regulate the cell providers like they do the power providers. And it's really the feds that regulate cell coverage. And so I know that I've seen that California has mandated higher standards for their cell towers. that's a law that they're urging the Oregon legislature to think about as well. Yeah, some of these fixes also create their own problems too. And this is another arena where, as an emergency manager, how you help offer some assistance or navigation, you can quickly lose your trust and credibility with folks, or you can, just simply say, I don't have an answer, but I'm going to help you find a solution and a course of action here. And it's going to take years. And it's another reason for undergrounding utilities in the long run. So people don't have to have these public safety power shutoffs too. Jay, do you want to have the last word, since I think you've got your fingerprints all over this series?
Well, I'd like to thank all of you that came and presented, and it's been an amazing series, and I've enjoyed it and learned a lot from it. And I hope that all the people who have signed on likewise. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for bringing this presentation to us, Jay. We hope to do more like this next year, and it was an amazing series. So we really appreciate you all. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, Jay, can you stay on?
Yes.
That was a great presentation, by the way. We got kind of quiet right after you presented, but you did. I was wonderful, and I'm glad to see the emphasis on the Lifeline. I thought that was wonderful.
Oh, good. It was a little bit silent afterwards, and
Yeah.
I was having, I couldn't see my slides the way that I thought I could. So I didn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so I
wanted to-
hope it didn't seem awkward on the, on your
No,
side. 'Cause
it was fine. I mean, it looked
Yes,
great.
it was good.
So I want to share something that I got my attention. I'm going to try and share screen if I can. Are you seeing a photo of power lines in what looks like a river?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that online too.
This is last week in
Yeah.
response to the hurricane, and it's just remarkable. I mean, aside from the utility vehicles in the flooded highway, just the number of them, and I remain. I don't know how I feel about this, but there's such a rush to build back after an emergency, particularly
Yes.
our infrastructure, that we don't take the time to do it better. And that's a piece that's got to change for me. So anyway, I wanted to share that here. So
Thank
anyway,
you.
all right, thank
Can
you.
you send that to us?
Sure, I will. Yeah.
And I would love to meet you in person at some time.
Yeah, well,
You know,
hopefully we can do the get together, and I can get up there when it happens. So anyway,
Okay.
very nice. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
okay.
Okay.
I'll talk to you offline.
Okay.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for
Thanks, Colleen. and
having me.
Kathy.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Colleen. Okay.
Jade, let's talk about what you want to do next year after January, because you always bring such good people and good presentations. We need to do something like this next year.
Okay. We'll be in touch. I'll be in touch.
Sounds
Do you
good.
guys have like a committee so it's not just like talking heads and then everybody goes away, but there's like some sustained effort and progress on anything in particular? Like, it's ridiculous that there's no statewide URM inventory. That's not that hard, especially with all the AI and satellite imagery and all that. It's like, why, it isn't, I suppose it's not a priority.
We don't have any specific committees, within AIA Oregon, but it's not to say that something can't be brought to the table too.
It's
Okay.
a topic that I think I'm going to start trying to address this coming year.
Okay. I have 5 bills that I'm working on, legislation, just like a little bit, because I'm not, because I have my real work to do too. But is that something, is Cindy Roberts still the lobbyist? Is that something that she can?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's, yeah. And I want to talk to Restore Oregon, and because they were involved in the last time we tried to do this. And I think there's been enough time that we can maybe politically convince people to actually try it again. I mean, Portland felt pretty burned by what happened. And they lost the court case for the court for freedom of they lost that court case as well.
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that I think that in some ways they really screwed up, and it screws it up for everybody.
yeah,
It puts a bad taste, like people not following the issue if they say a little bit something, and it's when there are newspaper articles and news coverage that's where you have leaders in the Black community saying, I'm getting targeted here by
Yeah,
the city of
you're in trouble.
Portland. It's hard to recover from that.
yeah,
And basically unfunded mandates like that, they need to be addressed in in a better way.
yeah.
I mean, nobody is arguing that URMs are unsafe. At least I didn't hear any argument about that. But it's what to do about it.
Yeah. Well, I think
Anyway.
we need to take another stab at it and figure out a coalition that basically can lead it through to a successful conclusion.
Okay. So one of the bills I'm working on is risk bonding for the CEI hub area, like after a company spills all sorts of oil, they'll just
Write it off.
leave.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about insurance. I have no idea if these bills are going to pass, but that's one of them. The other one is geographic diversity of fuel sector. Odo just came out with their report, and I think that it would be good to follow up on that. And the third one I mentioned in my talk just briefly is having an energy transition plan for the CEI hub in a way that's energy secure. Like you can't just move all the fuel tanks. You'll have no, I did this little calc, and you would have to put solar panels over a third of Oregon and have the sun going like 24/7 and all that to have enough fuel to equate to the fuel storage there. You have to do something that balances out the energy. And then the fourth one is it's to allow additional ways for DEQ to spend money in the Treasury Fund that was established by Senate Bill 1567, so that it could help with like wildfire management in Forest Park rather than going directly to the fuel company. So it's a little bit house cleaning-ish in that there's no money in there right now. So
Yeah.
it's a little, but I think that these things should be done. And since since Senator Dembro is retiring, and he wanted to do something a little bit more on his way out, but he's not going to be shepherding, these things. So I don't know what AIA might want to get behind, but none of them are politically none of them, I only work on things that should be bipartisan, strongly bipartisan. So.
Okay.
Okay, I saw some chat things go up, but I didn't look at it because I was having problems with my PowerPoint. If you want to follow up with that, I can answer something if you think that I should. Otherwise, I don't think anybody asked me anything.
No, I think you're okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again.
Okay. See you, Jay.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.